The F1 Pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza.
Formula One?
Yeah, we go to town on it.
Okay, you are very welcome back to the F1 Pod on Off the Ball. It's episode 6 weekly between now and then and the end of the season, of course, reflecting on the previous weekend's Grand Prix live on Wednesdays in the F1 Pod podcast feed and indeed the Off the Ball Daily podcast feed as well. Wherever you get your podcasts, the F1 Pod on OTB, brought to you by Chicago Town Pizza. Real takeout taste for less with Chicago Town. Keep your questions, comments and thoughts coming in. You get myself on Twitter at Shane Hannon01. And delighted to welcome back for episode 6. We have Bernie Collins, the F1 pundit and former head of race strategy with the Aston Martin Formula One team. And of course, John Watson as well, the former F1 driver and 5-time Grand Prix winner. Bernie and John, how are things?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks for having us.
It's not bad in Oxford today after a very busy Silverstone. It's nice to relax for a change. And Bernie, did you when you were doing your job for Sky TV, did you nail you know who? I asked you to do that.
Well, actually, I think I probably forgot in Austria, and then I wasn't working for Sky in Silverstone, John, so
okay,
I missed that opportunity.
Okay.
John, keep you on your toes, Bernie, for sure. I guess one of the things that came out of Silverstone, guys, and we'll get into the race proper, but I couldn't help but love the interview that Brad Pitt did with Martin Brundle. It was just strange to see a couple of Hollywood actors walking the pit lane, and of course they're filming this movie that is, I think, as yet untitled. Lewis Hamilton is involved as a producer as well. But Bernie, this looks like an exciting project. It's just strange to see, I guess, the Hollywood lights at an actual real life Grand Prix.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. Like, I was at Silverstone over the weekend, and you see them, and they really tried to blend in. They sort of all had a team kit, and at times it was hard to tell the difference between who was a Pirelli guy for the movie and who was a Pirelli guy in real life. And there was a lot going on. They had a full garage there. There's lots of pictures, of the cars lined up outside the front and sort of a pit wall and stuff that they're doing some filming at. And I think there's a real buzz in both directions. There's a lot of the F1 teams, various mechanics or engineers walking down to look into the garage and see what it looks like. And equally the other way, there's a lot of the crew or the cast walking along the pit lane to see how people are operating in real life for CF1. I think it's very different for the film world to be forced to do it in such a relentless environment. Saturday was wet, Sunday's sunny. So they're outside of the normal studio controlled atmosphere. So it's really interesting to see it coming together. And I'm surprised that, Brad's interview in Sky really give a lot more than I thought.
Yeah, I don't know if he probably intended or meant to say half of what he did, but Javier Bardem, I think he revealed, is in the movie as well. So it's Joseph Kosinski. It's his upcoming F1 movie. Still thin on plot details, but apparently Brad Pitt plays this fictional character who comes back after a brilliant career in F1. I think in the 90s, comes out of retirement for a relatively small F1 team alongside Joshua Pierce, who's played by Damson Idris. And they were using these F2 cars, John, modified to make them look like F1 cars, and they had the cameras on the side of the cars to pick up all the speed. Quite impressive, albeit Brad Pitt's not hitting the speeds that the other drivers on the grid are hitting. But I guess to go around that track at Silverstone with the crowds there, still a bit of pressure.
Well, first of all, movies in Formula One have been bedfellows for quite some time. There was a movie made back in the 70s, and it used the Brabham team as a background. It was called Bobby Deerfield with Al Pacino in the star. Then you had Grand Prix back in the 60s, James Garner. And of course, people like Gene Hackman was amazing, just a massive Formula One fan, would come to Grand Prix. He was a big friend of the Shadows team. This was way back in the 70s. But we're up to where we are now, Brad Pitt in the pit lane, in the paddock, whatever. I think it's Trevor Carlin's team is actually running what is a Formula 2 car dressed up to look like a Formula 1 car. Duncan Tappy, a young British driver who's raced in various different formulas over the years, will actually be in the car during the most of the sort of the serious driving. But of course, Brad will hop in and out, and I'm sure he'll do it with great style when the cameras are doing the close-up shots. But it's only good for Formula One. Drive to Survive has done so much to take Formula One out of being just a Grand Prix weekend. It's now an event. And Silverstone, to me, I went there and I thought, well, I'm not at a Formula One race. I'm at Glastonbury does Formula One. It just, the scale of the event, the scale of the the entire estate. I don't know how many people they packed in over the weekend. They were talking about 480,000 or 430,000 over the 3 days, 4 days. Phenomenal. And that is in part Brad Pitt being there and the Apex race team. And I think he's called Sonny Hayes. That's the character he plays. I mean, if you want to see Brad Pitt acting as Brad Pitt can do, go and see a movie called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He is genius. And if he brings that quality to this movie, and I don't know what the title of the movie will be, but I will certainly look forward to seeing it. And I think Brad Pitt's, well, we know he's a star. He's a great star.
Yeah, absolutely. Fight Club as well. He's just a brilliant actor in everything he does. I think. And Sonny Hayes, you're right. That's the character. I think he divulged in that interview with Martin Brundle. His character has a horrible crash, disappears from racing, gets involved in other disciplines, and then his friend, who's played by Javier Bardem, is the team owner. This is the team that are last place. They've never scored a point, and they have that young phenom as well, played by Damson Idris. So they bring Brad Pitt back in from the cold. It was funny just to see them even walk into the start of the race with the other drivers. I assume the other drivers wouldn't be looking at this going, oh, this is ridiculous. These two Hollywood guys coming in and pretending they're F1 drivers. There would be no egos at play here, would there? They're all just
you've
aware.
Got to be joking. Every driver on the grid's got an ego bigger than a house. And the fact that everybody was looking at Brad Pitt and Idris, they were going, well, what about me? I'm meant to be the star of this show. Look, it's all part of the business. It is show business. And Formula One is getting now closer to show business. The movie's going to take it into that zone. So everybody who was on the grid, and I think the one that I saw closest to Brad Pitt was Carlos Sainz. And he's from a good background, a sophisticated family. He knows how to behave. He's not going, hey, Brad, hi, Brad, can I have your autograph? They're all professionals. And Carlos Sainz just walked down onto the grid, stood there, and looked absolutely as natural a movie star as he's a Grand Prix driver.
It's amazing. Like Bernie, I still have yet to get Silverstone ticked off my bucket list, but it just looks like a carnival atmosphere, especially when you get a reasonable bit of good weather as well, and it's always a random enough podium usually. But it just seems like a real exciting one. Like, was it the same for yourself when you were involved in F1? Was it a race that everyone looked forward to?
I think when you're involved in it, slightly different to this year going more as a spectator. When you're involved in it, there's pros and cons. So yeah, like John said, it was 480,000, I think, across this weekend, the biggest turnout we've ever had at Silverstone. It's always, Silverstone brings the best of everything. Friday, everyone got burnt. Saturday, everyone got soaked. So you need to cover for all eventualities. And it's one where there is a real atmosphere amongst the fans. There's a lot of queuing to get in and out. There's a lot of people wandering around outside the paddock, all of this thing. So it does feel like a really busy race, very different to some others that we go to. As when working in it, it's always the home Grand Prix. And I don't know John's opinion, but a home Grand Prix generally is terrible because the people from the factory, especially Aston Martin, it's literally 10 minutes across the road. You'll always say, oh, that part will be all right to deliver to them on a Friday morning. So your parts always come later because it's just across the road and everything always gets pushed back. So you always end up later at the track. And it's a very different atmosphere being at home and driving to the track as being in the hotel. It changes your mindset a little bit. It's harder to get in the Saturday night, Sunday zone because you're leaving from your own house and having your own breakfast and got your own things going on. You know, I've never put a wash on over any other Grand Prix weekend. These little things that actually change your headspace a little bit are different for Silverstone. But it's always a really great atmosphere, regardless of the weather. And I think that really shone through a bit this year. I was lucky enough to go. There was a launch party there on Thursday night. Desklin and Calvin Harris played, and it was really like party, carnival atmosphere. Lots of people, loitering about. Johnny Herbert was on the stage with the old Silverstone trophy and things. So it was a real buzz about the place from Thursday onwards. And because everyone's camping and stuff, it brings a slightly different atmosphere to the whole weekend.
I did want to get both of your views on something, and we will get to the actual racing shortly, but I guess another one of the headlines, and there's always headlines off track as well, but Martin Brundle's, I guess, grid walks are a staple of the television experience for people watching Formula One, and they have been for many years. Certainly entertaining, and he had this moment with Cara Delavingne, model, and I guess it was one of those, again, infamous Martin Brundle awkward moments where the celebrity doesn't want to talk, maybe isn't aware of who Martin Brundle is or what he's doing. And I guess Cara came out afterwards and explained that the PR person for F1 was telling her not to speak, and I don't know who. A lot of people on Twitter seem to be suggesting one was in the wrong, the other was in the wrong. What was your take, Bernie? Like it's just one of those things, Martin Brundle. Like if celebrities were informed as to who he is and what he does, they could avoid this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's true. Or if Martin was provided a full list of people that didn't want to speak to him in advance, there's two ways of avoiding the situation. Either you enforce everyone to talk to him, or you provide him with a list of people who aren't going to talk to him. That's the two ways around it. Like he obviously does his research to know who everybody is in advance of being on the grid. It's hard to get the full story. I think we don't really know the full story of what her pre-briefing was before going on the grid. There's lots of very strong opinions, like you say. Obviously, when you step into the paddock, you agree to be filmed. That is a prerequisite of stepping into the paddock, is you agree to be filmed, but you don't necessarily agree to be interviewed. So there is a slight difference there. So everyone has the right to say, no, I don't want to speak about that, or whatever it might be. But the grid is slightly different. It's a very privileged position to be in. And it's funny because obviously she is there for PR for that team and the brands that she's supporting. I think she was at the time wearing a branded cap that she's, rumour has it, paid to be wearing on the grid at that time. And this is the very cynical version of me, but if I was wanting to get maximum attention for my brand on the grid, I would refuse to talk to Martin and have some sort of funny thing that we're discussing, because I don't actually know who else Martin interviewed on the grid. I've not seen any clips from any other interview on the grid, just the one that was rejected. So to get the ultimate PR out of it, you'd reject the interview. So I don't quite know where it sits on that, and that is me being very cynical, but it has brought more PR than any other interview that was done on that grid on Sunday.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I similarly have not seen any other interviews Martin Brundle did, and I know he did others, but certainly clips afterwards. It's the only one that seems to have done the rounds. It's a funny one, John, isn't it? Because I mean, it's part and parcel, as you say, of the showbiz and the entertainment side of it. But you get these awkward moments from now and again.
Well, first of all, I like Bernie's lateral thinking on the whole. Did Cara Delavingne deliberately go out of her way not to engage in an interview, and consequently, what's gone on to social media is only about that incident on the grid where she wouldn't speak to Martin, and that you had the PR person from the team she was associated with sort of saying no interviews. I mean, fundamentally, and as I understand it, if you are there as the guest of a team or a major sponsor, and you are going to be on the grid, there's a natural expectation that there's going to be a cooperation, which does include having an interview. But we've seen on previous occasions, and sometimes even in North America, where everybody is much more maybe PR savvy than we are in Europe, that Martin has walked up to somebody and asked for an interview. Now, on occasions, Martin has mistaken the person he's talking to for somebody else, which doesn't go down particularly well. But you'd expect that on a grid with a world-famous person as Cara Delevingne, and she's there at the behest of sponsors and being probably remunerated for her presence, that you would have a few words. But whatever was decided or whatever went wrong, I don't know. I mean, Martin has got a difficult job on the grid because he knows the celebrities that are there. He would know which direction to go, and he's being told in his ear, Charlie Hummingtop's 2 cars down beside the old Brabham team, or whatever you want to describe. So he would be on a mission to catch those people. He's assuming that those people are going to cooperate and give a decent and a response to. Well, Martin's questions are not stupid questions, but it's not rocket science either. He's not putting them on the spot and asking her about her tattoos or anything personal. It's about, you're here in the grid. What do you think of it? It's fantastic. You're here with this A, B, C, or D team. And you'd expect a civil kind of response. So it was disappointing. It was an awkward moment, actually, for everybody who was watching it. And maybe some people did have a laugh at Martin, but it's a tough job he does. And he's had a few knockbacks in the previous seasons. So hopefully, we'll hope it won't happen again, but I wouldn't hold my breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's certainly he's certainly brilliant at what he does, Martin Brundle. And yeah,
hold on. He's good. He's not brilliant. He's very good. Don't get carried away.
Sorry, I know it's a subjective thing, John. Apologies. Yeah. It's entertaining anyway. Put it that way. It was like, I guess it's one of those moments that just makes you laugh, and it was more entertaining than the safety car interlude anyway. That during the race itself, put it that way. I guess on the race itself, Bernie, we'll get into it. Lando Norris is probably where I wanted to start because he was just brilliant. McLaren brilliant. They had the technical upgrade that kind of put them in contention recently in Austria, and like the qualifying for both Norris and Oscar Piastri, second to none. And then he overtakes, of course, Verstappen at the start, and you think this is going to be brilliant. Naturally enough, Verstappen catches him, but what a weekend for Lando Norris in particular.
Yeah, a really strong weekend for Norris. And, we spoke post Austria, if it was just that Austria maybe suited the McLaren, obviously the upgrade was working well because there was a big difference between Norris and Piastri. But this week in those, inter to wet or inter to dry conditions in qualifying really shone through. Both of them setting brilliant laps to get the lap done at the right time. And it was effectively a one lap qualifying because the track improvement was so big. So really strong showing from them. Good to see that upgrade still continuing to work, although many of the track characteristics very similar to Austria. And it was good to see such a strong showing from them both. Piastri was unlucky with the safety car. He should have been in the podium position as well. So very strong for McLaren, very strong for Norris to get, the podium in Britain compared to where they were in Bahrain at the start of the year. It's a phenomenal turnaround for both the team and the driver. So yeah, it's very positive going forward. It's interesting the Verstappen bit because I think Verstappen is being a bit reserved off the line because he knows he can get the positions back later. And I think what we've learned is that the McLaren is very strong tyre warm-up. So both at race start and post-safety car, Norris was fit to have the legs on whoever he was fighting, despite, post-safety car Hamilton being on a very strong soft tyre that should have, we all thought in the back, or some of us thought in the background, that soft tyre was going to be much stronger post-safety car restart. So a combination of Norris and McLaren very strong on the tyre at the beginning.
Yeah, it's another landmark victory for both Verstappen and for Red Bull. So this is his 6th win in a row, equals McLaren's 1988 record as well of 11 consecutive victories for Red Bull. They're unbeaten since Abu Dhabi last year. And John, as Bernie says, even off the line, he gets that wheel spin. Norris catches him quickly, but because of their superiority in DRS and all the rest, it was always going to be a Verstappen win regardless.
Well, it had the makings of it all the way through. Certainly in qualifying, getting pole position, but the McLaren's showing in qualifying was extremely strong. I understand, as Bernie's alluded to, that they're able to turn their tyre on in those sort of cooler mixed conditions better than some of the other teams around them, and that was partly the reason why they were on the front row, on the second row of the grid. And a great start from Norris to take the lead, but it was inevitable Max was going to pass. What I wasn't maybe quite so happy about was the way that Norris defended. Once Lewis was behind him, he defended quite aggressively, I felt, coming down the Wellington straight. And I'm not a fan of seeing drivers moving around aggressively. These are quick cars, and if any contact had occurred, it would have been a major accident. And again, for Oscar Piastri, who I think is really, for me, the star of McLaren and the star of the future at McLaren, I think that he did deserve to be in the podium. He was one step behind, I think, in the upgrades. He got the upgrades that Norris had earlier, but he was still behind where Norris is. Both drivers were outstanding, and it's taken McLaren from a position of where they were head scratching and not knowing what was going. Remember, James Key left the team about a month and a bit ago. So how much of the upgrades are the legacy of what he's had, or is that something that's occurred in the time since James Key left? So as you look at it, we're going to another Grand Prix in Hungary in about 10 days' time. Totally different kind of circuit to the high speed of Red Bull Ring and Silverstone. So whether the car will perform in those circumstances, it's hard to tell. Also, Hungary at this time of year, Central European heat can be oppressive. This weekend, it's going to be nuts. I'm going to Italy. They're talking about 40 plus Celsius. So if it's anything like that at the Hungaroring, that will change again the dynamic of the cars that are turning the tires on early, as opposed to those that are maybe a little bit later in getting tire temperature. Lots of things that, Bernie knows this better than I do, but lots of things that are factors that apply to specific circumstances, as we had at Silverstone.
Yeah, and Bernie, John rightly points out Oscar Piastri's performance there, and probably hasn't got credit this season because Norris seems to be the poster boy very often for McLaren. But I'm fairly sure his car as well lacks the new front wing and nose that that Norris has. So his performance in particular, both in qualifying and then to get P4, probably disappointed not to get his first ever podium, but it is still his best ever finish in a Formula One race for Piastri. And that McLaren team is just so exciting.
Yeah, I think the driver lineup's amazing there, and they've had a bad start to the year, but with the two drivers now, you think they're going to score significant or should score significant points. Totally echo John's point. Hungary is going to be a very different kettle of fish. So is he going to be fit to, or is the team going to be fit to counter the low speed there, counter the degradation they seem to be having, and the softer compounds? There's a lot going on in Hungary that's very different to what we just had. So it'd be interesting to see those teams. There's a lot of teams very close together, how that order shakes up again. Piastri looks very strong. There was a lot of excitement about Piastri pre-season. We've not seen that with the struggles in the car and him struggle to get embedded in the team. But it's very exciting going forward for the rest of the year. And, post-race, he will sit down with the team and they will all fully understand the reason he was not on the podium was just pure luck with the safety car. I think they made the right decisions. I think, he drove well. His pace was good relative to Norris. So everything was there for that to happen. So if he just continues that, then the podiums will come in time. But let's see how the McLaren pace stacks up in Hungary.
I should say as well, I know, Bernie, we made the predictions last week for Silverstone, and to be fair, for once I said I'd write them both down. I'm fairly sure now I had gone Max to win, Norris second, which was fine, and then Sainz in third. I'm pretty sure, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you said Max to win, Hamilton second, Norris third. So I think you got the podium. I mean,
right.
aside from Hamilton and Norris, you got the three people on the podium exactly correct. So that's pretty impressive.
That's good. Well, I won't correct you because I didn't actually write mine down. So if you've written them down, then we're going to go with that. And it's the right answer, close enough.
Exactly. That's pretty impressive, I have to say. We should touch on Hamilton because, John, he was so impressive. I think he'd be pretty pleased with the weekend he's had, and that battle, as you said, with Norris, edgy, but Hamilton will be pretty pleased to get the podium.
Yes, I think he was disappointed he didn't get second place because he pushed very hard to find a way around Norris. But the McLaren just had speed at different parts of the circuit the Mercedes didn't have. Lewis is a phenomenal race driver, and he's one of the cleanest race drivers I've ever seen. He was having to be on his toes because he was racing against a young driver who's on his way up to achieving greater success, who was prepared to drive in a manner which is not dissimilar to what he would have done in Formula 3. Lewis might have done that in his opening season. I know at times Lewis took high risks in his opening season, but that was 2007. I can't even do that mathematics. How long ago? 16 years ago. So Lewis now drives in a manner which is appropriate to a 7 times world champion, but a driver who's still capable of winning another world championship. And give him a car, he will do that. And what will be interesting to see is how long Red Bull can maintain the advantages that they've enjoyed certainly last year and this year. Will they be able to maintain it for a third year in 24? Or Mercedes go back to the drawing board and come up with something that isn't as radical, but something that's more, I'd say, user-friendly to both drivers? I would love to see George Russell likewise. So we haven't been talking about George, who I rate extremely highly, and I would put him in the same category as Lewis.
Absolutely. We're going to take a short ad break. I'm going to pick up on George Russell and Alex Albon, in fact, just after this break. But stay with us. Episode 6 of the F1 pod on Off the Ball with Bernie Collins and John Watson. We'll be back in just a sec. All right, you're very welcome back to episode 6 of the F1 pod on Off the Ball, weekly between now and the end of the season, always live on Wednesdays after race weekends in the F1 pod podcast feed and the Off the Ball daily podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. We have Bernie Collins, the F1 pundit and former head of race strategy with the Aston Martin Formula 1 team, and John Watson, the former F1 driver and 5-time Grand Prix winner. Just before the break there, John, you were talking about George Russell, and we were, I guess, rightly giving Lewis Hamilton plenty of credit, but Russell as well deserves so much credit for the season he's having, not least as well Alex Albon.
Yes, both drivers have had a difficult season. Remember, George Russell won a Grand Prix last year in Brazil, so we know what he's capable of. But again, it's sort of a give and take within the Mercedes team, and Lewis is essentially the number 1 driver and George is number 2. So I don't think there's a written contract that states that, and on occasions one's outperformed the other, but both are capable of performing at the highest level, given the equipment and given the opportunities. Qualifying was better for one than the other, but it was still, wet going dry at Silverstone or any racetrack always leads to a grid lineup that may not be the norm. Mercedes benefited out of it in one hand, but George was maybe not quite so far forward as he would have anticipated.
Bernie, Alex Albon, I mean, he drove a super race in the Williams. They've been fast all year, and I think people have said this, in a straight line, might struggle otherwise, but calmly holding off Charles Leclerc and some very, very important points for his team in 8th as well. So a good weekend for Alex Albon.
Yeah, I think, he's had two fantastic weekends. I think Austria and here. The straight line speed for Williams definitely benefiting that car setup, but Albon really fit to make the most out of the car, fit to make whatever strategy they want work. They seem to be working quite well as a unit, as a team, where the comm seems good across both. It seems calm decision making across both, and a bit of an acceptance that as a team they're going to try and make whatever the strategy is, whatever the goal is for the weekend, come together well. And I think that was particularly evident, in Austria, where they got the straight line speed right and things. So I do think that he's outdriving the car. For that Williams car to finish in that position in Silverstone, yes, they got the safety car or whatever, but still to be fit to hold on to those positions later on in the race is pretty incredible, really. And they're got to be taking all the points they can get. The field's a lot closer this year than it has been in the past, so it is easier to pick up those points. But I think he's really shone, in that car, and seems to be getting stronger, if anything.
From a strategy perspective, Bernie, like Ferrari, we seem to always be talking about strategy and in race decisions when we're talking about Ferrari, but the safety car maybe didn't help. Charles Leclerc makes the double stop, and I guess there's a lot of focus on the weekend with Carlos Sainz, who won at Silverstone last year. He doesn't change tires during the safety car, ends up 10th. So I mean, they get points, but not exactly the points that Ferrari would have been looking for.
Yeah, from starting P4 and P5 on the grid, they're going to be very disappointed with the weekend, and there's going to be, I'd imagine, a very full review of how they ended up in that position, because at the start of the race, they had one Ferrari each with one Mercedes behind. So the pace wasn't poor, and given where the Mercedes finished, then they will be looking at why they ended up in those positions. Now, it's easy to see some of what happened in the fact that as the car ahead with a car directly behind, you're always worried about the undercut threat. And definitely for them, there was a lot of feeling the need to protect from Mercedes stopping too early. But in doing so, Leclerc was one of the first drivers, I think, to stop and stick to the medium hard strategy, which, ultimately was the incorrect decision. If there hadn't have been a safety car, probably still would have been the wrong decision, because Russell was passed very quickly after he boxed. But they didn't seem to react enough to looking at the track condition, looking at how low the degradation was, looking to the fact that everyone else was switching from the original medium hard one stop to a medium soft one stop. The entire field was swinging their strategy to softer compounds, and Ferrari were not. And it feels a bit almost like some big tanker that's very slow to turn around and make decisions quickly. That's how it feels. And even you see in the safety car decisions, for Carlos, a lot of uncertainty on what they're going to do. Are they going to stop? I think there was a few times that tires were in the pit lane, and Carlos actually asking, right, who's the cars behind that, I might need to come out behind. It just seems like the decisions aren't being made quickly enough and without enough question marks over it. So it feels like a management higher up than the strategy department on the pit wall type, too much communication happening and not enough just straight decisions happening and reacting to it. So they've got to be disappointed. They stopped too early with both cars. They stuck to the medium hard when they shouldn't have. They obviously had the issue with Leclerc, I think it was on Friday. They had no long run date on a Friday, which is important, but it was hotter track condition. Their DAG for Carlos on Friday on the soft was terrible. I think it was 3 times the DAG that the Mercedes had, which is why they, were probably afraid to go to the softer compounds. But they need to get on top of that. And that, fundamentally either a fear of going to the soft, rightly or wrongly, for their car, and a reluctance to switch the strategy resulted in them losing a lot of positions to Mercedes.
Yeah, geez, those degradation stats compared to Mercedes are worrying for Ferrari, to say the least. Like, John, they're just one of those teams that I guess has the fascination of everyone, and they've so many fans even here in Ireland. But it is the consistency, isn't it? And all those issues that Bernie points to, but consistency and decision making just seems to be such a massive issue for Ferrari.
Well, it's just interesting listening to Bernie and her rationale of what took place. It just seemed to be Ferrari's in a situation where the right hand doesn't appear to know what the left hand wants to do. And decision making, certainly when everybody made the pit stops, and ironically, I was going from one part of Silverstone to the other part when all that happened, so I didn't get to see what was going on at the time that the safety car got deployed and the pit stops were being made. But I was surprised to see so many people go onto the soft tire after that stop. I thought that wasn't in the original script that I was aware of, but I wasn't in the pit lane watching every time they were going out in practice or during qualifying. Nevertheless, I mean, just what Bernie is saying in terms of the rationale, the thinking. I mean, it's almost as if Bernie, if you were offered a job at Ferrari, do you think you could do a better job than the team is doing, or in conjunction with the people you'd work with, or do you think it's a no-go area?
Well, you never quite, based on my years in the pit wall, you never quite know how a team operates. I was very fortunate in my roles in Aston Martin in particular. I had a very good relationship with my manager, who's responsible ultimately for the decisions we take and the results that we have at the track. But when I made a decision as a strategist, that decision, 99% of the time stuck, and just that decision was made and actioned, and we moved on. And if the decision was incorrect, we went back and reviewed whatever, and we all make incorrect decisions as strategists. That is guaranteed. But it feels like actually at Ferrari, potentially the strategy team is making good decisions, but there's a full conversation then that needs to happen with whoever's responsible on the pit walls. It feels like those conversations are what's delaying actual decisions being made at track. I can't give you a straight answer to your question, John, because I've not been offered the position and I'm not sure how I would feel about the move to Italy. But it is a very high pressure role to be a strategist, I think, at Ferrari. And there's I can find reasons in what they did for why they made the decisions they made at the time. And maybe a little bit of his lack of confidence. What they did was sort of safer in a way and then fell back because of the safety car. But it just feels a bit like a poison chalice to me. So I think it would take a lot of money, John.
I'll tell you what, Italy's wonderful. The food is fantastic. The weather's normally great. And if you get it right, and the key to Ferrari is when Ferrari is right, and it was right certainly in the days of Ross Brawn and Michael Schumacher, and it's never really been as good as that subsequently. I mean, Kimi Raikkonen won the World Championship in 2007, and that's the last time a Ferrari driver has been a world champion. And with the resources the team has, the technical facility the team, I mean, that team should win every race, every season, every year.
Yeah, I tell you what, that you've sold it to me, John, with the weather and the food and everything else. I tell you, if
sorry, the red wine's excellent as well.
There you go. Well, if Ferrari want to come calling for me, I'll happily move over to Italy and take the job. My complete lack of race strategy knowledge compared to Bernie might be the only stumbling block. So it might be the CV is the issue. But sure, look, if they come calling, I'll have to go. Bernie, from your old team, Aston Martin, like Fernando Alonso was clearly disappointed when he was speaking after the race, and it was his worst race of the year. Certainly in qualifying, they were definitely disappointed with how things had gone. Does it feel like Ferrari and Mercedes and even McLaren now have, with their upgrades especially, moved maybe a little bit ahead of them almost?
Yeah, it definitely 100% feels like that. It feels like the upgrades that others have brought have changed the order. And, there's 4 teams that we're talking about: Mercedes, Ferrari, now McLaren and Aston. Those 4 are sort of fighting for that P2 position in the championship and the remaining steps that are on the podium each week. I would be really, it does feel like they've drifted over the last few races. Alonso was clearly disappointed. Lance had a bad sort of qualifying out. But I think it's going to be very interesting again to see what happens at Budapest. You're back to this low speed corners, very different track, very different temperature. Does that shuffle the order again? So does that bring Aston more back into it and someone like McLaren drop down the order? So I think this weekend's actually, or 2 weekends' time, is going to be very interesting for us to see where the order, because it does feel like Aston have drifted compared to what they were at the start. I wonder if it's a little bit us re-managing our expectation. You know, the first few races of the year, we weren't expecting Aston to do well. We expected maybe it would be just a Bahrain specific, and then Jeddah was a big challenge, and then the next one was a big challenge, and they seemed to pass all those challenges quite well. And now we're expecting them to be P2, and they're not P2. And equally, we're expecting, you know, McLaren to be at the back, and they're up in that P2 position. So it's this next race, I think, is going to really, we need to sort of average out those teams' positions then at the end of that to see on the whole over the year where we think we're going to fall. But I think Aston will be disappointed, the whole team. And, you know, Lance has had a few unfortunate weekends with safety cars and when he's pitted just before, just after. So yeah, I think they've got more work to do, I think, to get some upgrades onto that car and get them working in order to maintain that position.
One of the big pieces of news, I want to get both of your views on this one, is Daniel Ricciardo and his return to the grid. So I think some people have described this, John, as ruthlessness from Red Bull, but Nick de Vries let go after only 10 races in his rookie season. Ricciardo will replace him now. Of course, he's been the Red Bull reserve driver this season, but he's going, I guess, on loan to AlphaTauri. So this is quite an interesting move. Like, were you surprised to see this?
It's a pretty ruthless move. I mean, it's got Helmut Marko's identity all over it, but he's responsible for essentially the drivers that Red Bull keep in their portfolio of drivers. One driver who will be disappointed is Liam Lawson, who's one of the junior Red Bull drivers who's in Formula 2. And I mean, Nick de Vries, I had high expectations for this guy. I think he did a fantastic job last year in Monza in the Williams. I've been disappointed this year, but I don't put it down necessarily to Nick. I think that sometimes in a team which is not performing at the level I feel they ought to perform, I feel sorry for Nick de Vries. And bringing Danny Ricciardo back in, well, it's great for Formula One. Remember, Danny hasn't raced a Formula One car since the end of last year in Abu Dhabi. Well, he's been in a simulator. It's not the same as racing. And he's been in the Red Bull simulator. He's not been in a simulator, as far as I know. That's the AlphaTauri one. Going to Hungary, well, I don't know what he's going to do. If he can outperform certainly Tsunoda, then it's been the right decision. If he's running in a similar kind of position that Nick de Vries was running in, then you wonder why. The whole thing happened. Well, I don't know what de Vries was aware of. He may have been put on notice literally by the team that if you don't perform at Silverstone, you're out of a seat, out of a drive. It's very tough. I mean, I feel sorry for Nick. I think he deserved more time. And I think a lot of people feel that he wasn't given the time. And maybe in terms of what he wanted in a car, the team weren't able to give him that. And if you think of Danny Ricciardo back his 2 years at McLaren, outshone by Lando Norris, you know, do you think Lando Norris is a better driver than Daniel Ricciardo?
Yeah. What do you think, Bernie?
The results indicated that he is.
Yeah.
But I don't believe it. What I know of Daniel Ricciardo, 8 Grand Prix wins. But since he went to Renault, he never met, or whatever the team was called at that time, Renault, and then he went to McLaren. He never really quite recovered the kind of performance thresholds that he had when he was at Red Bull. But a driver doesn't forget how to drive a racing car. There's a reason why McLaren couldn't resolve it. I just hope that if he goes to, when he gets into the AlphaTauri, that he's going to be able to regain and refine the form that we knew he had.
I guess when you look at the Nick de Vries results, Bernie, from the season, it's not a surprise in that sense. His best finish was 12th, yet to score a point, out-qualified by Yuki Tsunoda on that team. And Franz Tost, the team principal at AlphaTauri, had said a few weeks ago that the coming races would essentially decide what happened with Nick de Vries, and clearly the races that followed didn't do enough to convince them that de Vries was their man. Yeah,
it's interesting. You know, my personal perspective is telling me I've got a few races to achieve a result isn't a great motivator for me as a person, and it very much depends on the person. But I think, you know, Red Bull or the AlphaTauri team, Toro Rosso, whatever, have history for being harsh with these decisions happening very quickly through the season. Arguably 11 races isn't a lot to sort of get settled in with a car, you know, that is struggling. I totally agree with John's point on the head-to-head often isn't a great mark of a driver. Ricciardo performed very well against Verstappen. You know, arguably at one point was beating Verstappen as Verstappen was getting settled into that team. and then went to Renault and on to McLaren and did very poorly. The AlphaTauri team scored 2 points. They've both been from Sonoda. So if you just look at the point score, it's not actually that much different compared to what it could be. So is Ricciardo going to turn it around enough that they're suddenly going to be scoring loads of points? They're last in the constructors as it stands. So there's definitely something fundamentally wrong. In order, they should be trying to improve. But it's not shining out to me that there's many drivers on the grid where the points difference or finish positions is much worse than the race versus Sonoda. So I think it is harsh. You have to wonder what the plan is. Is there a plan? Is there we need someone to be pushing the Checo seat. We need to be sure who our drivers are next year. But if the plan isn't for what's going to happen fundamentally with Checo, then they should be taking the 2 youngest, best drivers they currently can and building the team, because the car isn't good now. So they should be trying to build the drivers, build the team, work together and work to the future, and know that this year is maybe not going to be the year for it. And to change midway through a season is pretty harsh. So yeah, and it's a pity for De Vries, because we all seen him, stand in last year, and it was a very exciting prospect to see what could happen going forward.
Do you feel, John, that there's a fear of youth when it comes to replacing drivers, that giving youth a chance seems to be something that is almost sniffed at by some team principals, and they really just want to go for the experienced driver? Like, as you said, Liam Lawson was heavily linked. He's in the Japanese Super Formula Series as well, and doing really well. So are you surprised that the teams kind of opt for the experience over youth?
I think it's a lot to do with what the future may be at Red Bull. I was disappointed. I would just repeat myself, disappointed the team chose to do this. I don't think De Vries was given a fair opportunity. I remember also Franz Tost is leaving the team at the end of this year, so there's going to be a new management coming in, albeit it'll still be under the Red Bull umbrella. And there's an element of bringing in an experienced driver, albeit a driver who's been out of our Grand Prix car for 8 months, been in a simulator, but it's not the same, and he's not been in the same simulator as the Red Bull's in, but whatever. And on and on. And there's, talk yourself around in circles. I'm delighted Ricciardo's back. I'm not persuaded, sitting here now thinking about what's going to happen in Hungary. Is he the Valhalla that AlphaTauri have not yet found? And I don't know. I would have personally preferred to see De Vries stay in the car, maybe up until, if you want to change him, give him another 3 or more races. But putting him in that position is not easy. And it's just, if you're not seeing confidence coming from your team and from the management of the team, and you're doing your best with the equipment that you have. I mean, I have been in that situation on one occasion, and it's a very unpleasant situation to be in, because all of a sudden you find yourself, you're always on the back foot. All the upgrades are going to the other driver. The team are not then. There's a sort of an unconsciousness that can occur in the team where it's almost like you're like a bad smell.
Yeah, and Bernie, the elephant in the room here seems to be Checo Perez to a degree, because recently, like, he's in one of he's in the best car on the grid, and like, he's, I think, now failed to make Q3 5 races in a row. He's behind Verstappen by 99 points. He's only 19 points ahead of Alonso in third in the driver standings. Now, Christian Horner, I know, has been fully supportive of him. He's in under contract until the end of 2024. But does this feel like Daniel Ricciardo's almost audition for that Perez seat?
I think it is. I think it has. I have to be sort of looking at it, wondering what the team are thinking in that point. I'd like to see them at least give Checo a better run than they give De Vries. Checo has been there I think when he gets to maybe Holland this year, he's Verstappen's longest running teammate, I think, is the stat. And at the start of the year, it's not that long ago we were talking about him really challenging for the championship, and he's had 3, 4, 5 bad races since then. This weekend is an odd one in that I think he ran at the wrong time in Q1. And that, we don't know exactly where that decision came from, but between the team and the driver, you shouldn't be waiting at the end of a pit lane on a drying track for however many minutes he was there in order to get the lap done first. That's not how to do the best lap in drying conditions. Now, arguably, maybe they thought with the Red Bull, the performance should outshine the track improvement, but it didn't. And he ends up going out in P16 by a very small margin, I think, in the end. So there's a bit of a combination. Now, maybe that's just the team's lack of confidence in him or a red flag or whatever it might be. But there needs to be something, something needs to change as a whole. And he's come out and said he's not worried about it. He's very confident, but that's easy to say, isn't it? I've not been a driver, John can probably say, but he's got to be, feeling the pressure from all the conversations that he's getting, that's happening, all of the questions he's been asked in interviews, all of the media work around it. So yeah, it is going to be interesting to see how that progresses going forward. And it's a bit disappointing from Checo, given how strong the start of the year was. I was really, feeling like it really settled into the team and was really going to make a mark at the start of the year. So let's see how Hungary goes. But you'd like to think someone's at least given him to the shutdown and then have a review.
Even a driver with the mentality even of as strong as Checo Perez, you'd imagine, would feel some sort of pressure with Ricciardo now back on the grid. Guys, before we let you go, we should get the early predictions for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Albeit it's a bit out, a week and a half out. Last year's podium, just looking at it here, so Verstappen, of course, the winner, followed by the two Mercedes of Hamilton in second and Russell in third. I mean, it's a track where Daniel Ricciardo has had a win before himself in 2014. Ocon was the surprise winner for Alpine Renault in 2021. How do you see this one going, John? I get it's hard not to predict a Verstappen win, but how do you see the rest of the podium?
In this case, I think it's very easy to stick the tail on the donkey, because the donkey is going to be Max, and I don't see anybody beating him on pace. The only thing that can occur, I mean, weather I've mentioned, but you have wet races in Hungary. You can have factors that are beyond the control of the team, which are what Bernie loves, sitting in the pit wall, working out strategies. When do you want to come in? But more importantly, when you go back out on the track. But if it's a normal dry race, hot temperatures, I can't see anybody getting within a country mile of Verstappen, whether it's a high-speed circuit or a low-speed circuit like Hungaroring. Right now, they've got the whole championship sewn up in that car, where Perez will end up. Well, first of all, Perez, he hasn't forgotten how to drive a race car. What's happening is either there's bad timing. That's a great movie, by the way. Nick Roig. You ever see that movie, Bad Timing? Anyway, off the subject. Sorry, bad timing from the team, bad timing from the driver, loss of confidence, not getting a car balance that suits you, or having something that you're just off center in your approach or the team's approach to you. And that's not dissimilar in many respects to what's going on in AlphaTauri with Tsunoda and Nick de Vries. He finds himself in a situation where the team are now discussing whether he'll be in the team. He's got a rock-solid contract for 24. If the team want to remove him, they're going to have to pay through the nose. And I would love to know the paperwork in the legal. Remember, one of the best Formula One managers in the business looks after Sergio Perez. He ain't going to be sitting there, twiddling his thumbs, waiting for Red Bull to come up with some kind of decision.
How do you see it going, Bernie?
Yeah, I was interested on John's point there at the end with the contracts, because I think these guys find a way out of everything when they want to. I think the rumor was that Ricciardo was paid more not to drive than some of the others drivers were to drive post the McLaren contract. But I'm going to say Verstappen. I'm going to say Perez is going to turn it around and be back on the podium, and then I'm going to put Alonso in, because I think that Aston's going to come back for the Red Bull or for Hungaroring.
I actually agree with you. I think Perez is going to turn around. I'm going to put him third, and I'm going to put Hamilton second. So the same 1-2 as last year: Max, Hamilton, and then Perez to get his act together. Remains to be seen. Hungaroring's always exciting, and as you said earlier, John, the weather and the European heat, or what, I don't know which of you guys said it, but it certainly will add something to the mix. Guys, brilliant stuff as always. Thanks a million for hopping on.
Thank you.
Brilliant stuff. That is episode 6 of the F1 Pod on Off the Ball, in the F1 Pod podcast feed, the Off the Ball Daily podcast feed. That was Bernie Collins, the F1 pundit and former head of race strategy with the Aston Martin Formula One team, and John Watson, the former F1 driver and 5-time Grand Prix winner. We'll be back very soon with the F1 Pod. Thanks a million.
The F1 Pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza. Formula One? Yeah, we go to town on it.